Has it really been 13 years? Has it really been half of my entire life? I'm 26 years old, and in 4 minutes' time, Skyrim released 13 years ago. And I'll never forget that day. Skyrim first released on the 11th of the 11th, 2011. And I remember going to the midnight release of it with one of my friends at midnight. And it was something that we used to do all the time. Granted, a lot of midnight releases were not exactly a big deal. There wasn't always a queue. There wasn't always a lot of drama about it, but Skyrim was a big one. Granted, Skyrim would go on to be re-released at least another 4 or 5 times across pretty much every platform ever made, to the point where it would be an interesting topic for us to cover, to go through and decide whether Resident Evil 4 or Skyrim has been released more times, because it really might be a close battle. Sadly, long gone are the days where this sort of thing was normal, where you'd be anticipating a game's release for years in advance and you'd rock up to whatever shop you were going to, whether it was Game Station, Tesco, Asda. Back in the day, when it came to a game as big as Skyrim, GTA, Battlefield, Call of Duty, FIFA, all of those, it didn't matter. You'd turn up and there'd be other people there, there'd be a queue. Sometimes you'd go for smaller stuff and it would still have a midnight release, in that you could go up to a member of staff and be like, excuse me, this game just released. But other times, with a game like Skyrim, there'd be a massive queue. The staff themselves would put on an event. I remember when I worked at Tesco, I would fairly frequently have to do the midnight releases for the more significant games that came out. And it's just an era of gaming that I think is long gone at this point, especially now that most supermarkets are not 24 hours. Lockdown killed the era of supermarkets being 24 hours. And again, I worked at Tesco through lockdown, and I remember my shifts having to change because I would work the evening shift, like it would often cross over into the midnight hours, and just thinking, I hope that this isn't permanent, because this is going to be a problem when it comes to getting games. And it was permanent, or at least it has been 4 more years later. You guys could be watching this 4 more years from now, who knows? That's the magic of YouTube. Maybe it'll come back. I'm doubting it though, especially given that the latest PlayStation isn't releasing with a disc drive by default. I truly do think that the era of midnight releases, it's just not going to be what it was. Based on my analytics, the majority of people that are going to see this video are older than me. So again, I'm 26, which means that half my life ago, in 1 minute, to be fair, I would have been in a line right now at Tesco 13 years ago waiting for Skyrim. I'm pretty sure that I skived school the next day to play it. I would do that all the time. I'd just get up before my mother was awake, go and hover over the toilet, and then when she woke up, I'd make a bit of a throw-up noise, and because I was a bit of a sickly child anyway, I was always very ill as a kid, and I just sort of played upon that through my teenage years to get more time off school. I would have to have meetings with the education and welfare officer because they thought my attendance was going too low and they were worried that something was going on at home. They were right, there was, but that wasn't why I was actually having time off school. It was just because I liked playing games more than I did going to classes, especially Tuesday, because that evil bint, but we won't get into that story. Do you guys think that there's any chance of like massive games bringing back a midnight release for any reason at any point? Because another one that I remember being a huge deal, like the biggest of deals, like bigger than Skyrim even still, was GTA 5. I specifically remember that my form tutor when I was in year 10 when GTA 5 released had booked time off work specifically for that, and he was upright, told us. I remember me and this other lad, we were sat on our form on our table in tutorial or whatever it was, thinking, he wasn't lying. He actually did it. What a lad. Because we wish we were there. I couldn't, because at that point, my year head had already clocked what was going on, and he walked into tutorial at one point and was like, he was Irish, and I can't do the accent, but he was like, Cayle, what's your problem with Tuesday? No, I'm not doing the accent. I'm not doing it. He was like, Cayle, what's your problem with Tuesdays? And it's like, that bint, that horrible woman in IT. That's my problem with Tuesdays. So I'd always be skipping school to play COD or we'd go to the midnight release of a game and I'd sit there and play it all night. And if I played a game all night, I was, damn well I was not going to school the next day. It just wasn't happening. I remember I cracked a joke once that my year head really didn't like. I remember I said, well, if I got 70% on a test, you'd be pretty happy with my results. So why is 70% attendance a problem? he did not look happy. I'm going to make the same video that I'm doing right now, but on my TikTok, where generally the audience is insanely young, and I guarantee you, somebody's going to say that this is an old man shouting at a cloud about an experience that only he ever had. That was a comment that I got at one point when I've made videos before about missing midnight releases, and that was a comment that I got, and I was like, we are truly at the point where like 21-year-olds and below, who are only 5 years younger than me, are at a point where midnight releases were not a thing. Like at any point in their like lifetime that they can actually remember going to. I was going to midnight releases of games that I wasn't legally old enough to buy. I remember my mother would take me in. I'd go hide down the game aisle or something while she went and spoke to the security guard, because it was always the security guard, because after midnight the last member of staff usually goes home. And you have to go through self-scan. So they'd have to go around the back of customer service to get it. And then eventually that became me, which, it all comes full circle. But there's a part of me that thinks that, I don't know, maybe GTA 6 would be a big enough thing that they'll do an actual physical event for midnight releases. Because Game and all of those sorts of things, they would do things crazy. I remember I'd watch like Machinima Respawn videos about how in America they would do crazy stuff where they'd have like catering companies to deal with the 6 to 12 hour long queues, and there'd be like journalists there and news stations to film and interview people about things, especially when the release of like actual consoles, the PS3, the PS4, not so much the PS5. I remember being thoroughly disappointed at the lack of hype when the PS5 and the Series X came out compared to the PS3 or the PS4, about how big of a deal that was. And it's just, I think, I'm not anti-digital. Obviously, I'm a collector and I like collecting physical games, and I think a lot of other collectors do not like digital. I'm not anti-digital. I'm pro more options. The more options we have as gamers to play our games, the better, because it means there's no monopolies. Like, as much as I love CEX, it really isn't ideal for, the UK, that they are pretty much our only corporate choice when it comes to going to a town, going into a game shop and buying a game on disc. It's not ideal, but it is just the way the world is. So I'm not anti-digital, but I do think that one of the biggest things that digital has taken away from us is these memories of these midnight releases, because the kids of today are not going to have that memory. Their equivalent is sitting there, I suppose, like 6 minutes ago now, waiting for a timer to tick down that says they're allowed to play the game at midnight. There's no anticipation of waiting in a queue with a bunch of other smelly people. There's no anticipation of sitting in the car reading the back of the manual or reading the back of the box. Games these days, even if you buy them physical, often don't come with manuals. Times have really very much so changed. It was a good time. I remember like a week or two after Skyrim release, we were all still sweating it, but like Angry Joe made his angry review of it, and I just remember watching that, and just so many good times. And it was half my life ago. Every year around this time, I get nostalgic. There's a lot of big nostalgia things. Like right now, TikTok on my For You page is showing me like Black Ops 1 came out 14 years ago. Modern Warfare 2 came out 15 years ago. And I started playing Call of Duty at World at War, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, that was like 17, 18 years ago, something crazy like that, 16 years. And I'm like, is time really flying that quickly? It's why when I talk about, like, for example, one of the niches that I talk about on TikTok is business and investing long term and being in the S&P 500 for like a lifetime so that you can retire with a decent chunk of money, and not trying to get rich fast but get rich slow, because it's been proven that's how people do things and it works. And I try and explain to people younger than me that the time flies. Like I'm 27 in a few months, and I remember being 17 like it were yesterday. College was a great year. That was when I was 17, and that was a decade ago. And I know for a fact that some of the dudes that are watching this, if you're in your 40s, you probably don't feel too dissimilar to when you were 18. You do when you see other 18-year-olds and how they behave, I'm sure. But like when it comes to the actual time that has passed, I bet you don't feel much different. I bet you feel like you blinked and it just was gone. And that's crazy again, because like half my life ago was Skyrim, and we're still playing it. Like I'm still Fallout, Skyrim, Fallout New Vegas. Like they're all games that I still want to play like right now. We still don't have Elder Scrolls 6. Jesus Christ. I literally doubled in age and we still don't have another Elder Scrolls. What even? There are literally people on TikTok that watch me that were not born when Skyrim came out. This is why I feel old sometimes. If you're watching this and you're 20 years older than me, you're like, oh, this guy's young. Make videos on TikTok for a living, you'll feel old rapidly, regardless of how old you actually are. But yeah, I just thought I'd make this video remembering the good old days of Skyrim. Anyway, nostalgia done for the night. I'll see you guys later.